In the shadows of a city forgotten by time, where the narrow streets were silent witnesses to long-kept secrets, Professor Arthur became a specter among the invisible. Disguised as a beggar, his worn clothes exuding a smell of abandonment, and his calloused hands telling tales of hard times, he walked determined, yet always alert, around what seemed to be just another ordinary house. However, Arthur knew that Lorena resided there, whose actions, whispered on the winds, carried an air of mystery and danger. The house itself was nothing more than a facade for a deeper darkness. One cold night, while the city slept enveloped in its own nightmares, Arthur found a discreet entrance that led him to the basement. Each step was a note in a symphony of tension, and the smell of dampness mixed with mold seemed almost to repel the curious. There, under the dim light of a flickering lamp, his gaze fell upon something that chilled his blood. Piles of documents, letters, and objects that told. Stories of betrayals and deceptions orchestrated by Lorena. His fingers trembled as he turned the pages, each one a piece of a puzzle that, once complete, would reveal the true face of the woman the city thought it knew. But it wasn't the discovery that paralyzed him. It was the sound of footsteps above. Arthur's heart raced, each beat echoing in the basement chamber like a war drum. The reality was clear. He wasn't alone. With no time to think, only to act, he gathered the key evidence in his trembling hands and prepared for what could be his last run. The escape became a frantic ballet of shadows and silence, the footsteps above transforming into a menacing symphony that echoed in his mind. With each movement, the danger of being discovered grew, but the urgency to protect what could change everything was stronger. And then, as he emerged into the freedom of the starry night, the tension did not dissipate. His conscience burned with the realization that, even if Lorena didn't yet know it, the course of their lives had changed forever. Arthur was aware that, by choosing to act, he sealed destinies, and even if fear still lingered like a shadow, the hope of a different future shone like a faint light at the end of the tunnel. The evidence in his hands was not just paperwork. It was the promise of truth and justice, a legacy he was determined to protect at all costs. Jonas had always been a pure-hearted young man, someone whose soul seemed immune to the fog of negativity that so often plagues the world. From a young age, he faced life with a constant smile, even when the pain of losing his mother, Eleonora, threatened to suffocate his essence. Eleonora, with her melodious laughter and her unique ability to see beauty in everything around her, had instilled in Jonas the seed of optimism and resilience. Even in her absence, she remained alive in every positive thought he nurtured, in every decision to choose love over hate, understanding over judgment. It was this inner light that caught the attention of Professor Arthur, a man of sharp mind and protective heart. Upon meeting Jonas, Arthur saw in him not just a pupil, but a reflection of past hopes, and a future that could still be shaped. The friendship between the two blossomed naturally, nurtured by mutual respect and the challenges they faced together. Arthur admired the way Jonas faced adversity with unwavering courage, always ready to rise even when life tried to knock him down. He had become an affectionate mentor, always willing to share his life lessons, many of which were drawn from his own bitter experiences and the triumphs that time had brought him. Jonas, for his part, absorbed every lesson as if it were gold, always eager to learn and grow. He saw in Arthur not only a teacher, but a father figure, someone who was there to guide him through the storms. The two formed an unbreakable alliance, based on trust and brotherly love, something rare and valuable in a world so often dominated by selfishness and indifference. It was within this relationship that Arthur found himself compelled to protect Jonas from any threat, especially those that lurked stealthily around him. Lorena's figure emerged like a disturbing shadow, and Arthur, driven by a desire for truth, felt called to investigate her intention. The need to discover the truth took root in his heart, fueled by ancient philosophical teachings that always echoed in his mind. He remembered the words of his own mentor, who once told him that the truth, even if painful, is always the noblest path to follow. Arthur's mission had become personal. He knew that unmasking Lorena was not only a matter of justice, but also of protecting his chosen family. With the weight of this responsibility on his shoulders, he armed himself with determination and courage, ready to face whatever was necessary. He understood that by discovering what Lorena was hiding, he would not only uncover dark secrets, but also honor the values that Eleonora had planted in Jonas's heart, keeping alive the flame of hope and goodness in a world in need of heroes. The night breeze carried with it the murmur of the trees and the chirping of crickets, creating a symphony that accompanied Arthur's arrival around Lorena's imposing mansion. Disguised as an old beggar, his face was hidden by a disheveled beard and a worn-out hat, while his tattered clothes completed the disguise he hoped would be convincing enough to go unnoticed. Beside him, Hugo, the young man full of energy and cunning, listened attentively to Arthur's instructions. His heart pounding in his chest, Hugo knew his mission was crucial. Arthur, in a low, firm tone, reminded him of the importance of each calculated movement, of every corner of the house he would have to explore cautiously. "We can't afford to make mistakes, Hugo. Every detail could be the key to unlocking Lorena's secret," Arthur said, determination pulsing in his voice. The first glimpse of Lorena was like a cold blow. She appeared on the balcony, her presence exuding an aura of indifference and superiority that made even the air seem to bend. Her eyes, cold as steel, swept the horizon without truly seeing, and Arthur, observing her from his strategic position, felt his suspicions ignite like embers in a fire. Lorena's haughty posture was that of someone who believed herself above worldly weaknesses, someone who hid dark secrets beneath the veil of a seemingly spotless life. While Arthur held his position, Hugo crept with the agility of a cat through the shadows of the garden. His heart pounded, but his mind was focused on the mission. With light steps, he approached the strategic points Arthur had designated. With each window, he peeked through, each door he tested. Hugo felt the responsibility of his task pressing on his young shoulders, but he didn't let it get him down. He knew he was there not just for Arthur, but for something much bigger. Inside the house, the luxuriously decorated rooms told stories of ostentation, but Hugo knew the true tale lay hidden in the shadows, far from prying eyes. With the confidence of an apprentice following in the footsteps of a master, he pressed on, aware that any carelessness could jeopardize everything. The occasional sound of a door closing or distant footsteps served as a constant reminder of the lurking danger. Outside, Arthur kept his senses sharp, ready to act at the slightest sign that something wasn't going according to plan. His hands, though marked by time and hardship, were still steady and ready to face any challenge. He knew that, just as a coin has two sides, so too did truth and falsehood coexist, and it was his duty to bring them to light. As the night wore on, the feeling that something grand was about to happen grew in the air. Arthur and Hugo, each in their role, were determined to unravel the mysteries that Lorena so desperately hid. And in doing so, they hoped not only to protect the innocent, but also to rekindle hope in a world that so desperately needed heroes. This was the journey they were willing to undertake, even if the path was full of shadows and dark secrets. Night swallowed the city with its dark, starry cloak, and the quiet of the streets was broken only by the occasional murmur of the wind or the distant howl of a lone dog. Hugo, disguised as a beggar, had become an almost invisible presence to passers-by, but not to Lorena. Something in her, perhaps an instinct, sharpened by the fear of losing control over her secrets, began to notice the disturbing frequency with which that beggar appeared in the vicinity of her house. And not only him, Hugo, the professor who was always nearby, seemed to have an inappropriate curiosity, a gaze that probed more than necessary. Lorena, enveloped in her paranoia, began to feel the weight of unseen gazes. With each chance encounter with Hugo, a shiver of distrust ran through her. Did he know something? What was he looking for? Driven by a burning desire to maintain her position and power, she decided to act. Her mind, a kaleidoscope of strategies and fears, began to weave cunning plans. She knew she needed to discover the extent of Hugo's knowledge and, above all, the reason why the beggar haunted her like a silent ghost. She began planting social traps, subtle insinuations and rumors, like someone sowing weeds in someone else's field. She approached Hugo's colleagues and acquaintances, always with a kind smile, but her questions were like slithering snakes, trying to extract information without arousing suspicion. She created small events, subtle invitations to coffee or dinners, where she could probe Hugo, observe his reactions, measure her words. At each meeting, she studied Hugo with the precision of a scientist, searching for gaps in his armor of carefree professor. But Hugo was shrewd, and his unwavering calm only increased Lorena's unease. For her, recent events could not be a coincidence, and every seemingly innocent gesture of Hugo's was analyzed, dissected, in search of hidden intentions. Lorena's silent animosity began to grow, a shadow spreading in her heart. She saw threats in every shadow, enemies around every corner. She was determined to protect the secret in her basement at any cost, even if it meant a silent war against Hugo and the mysterious beggar. In her sleepless nights, she murmured to herself, promises and curses intertwined, while her plans became increasingly complex and dangerous. Thus, the seed of intrigue germinated, fueled by fear and the need for control. And while Lorena plotted her strategies, Hugo and the beggar waited, each playing their own game against time, and the mystery that Lorena so desperately tried to conceal. It was a game of chess in the shadows, where each move could change the fate of many. And meanwhile, the secret in the basement waited silently to be revealed. In the small town where the seasons seemed to blend into an eternal golden autumn, the streets were tinged with a blanket of fallen leaves, and the air was permeated by a cool breeze that carried with it whispers of ancient stories. It was on one of these tranquil mornings that Eleonora, a woman of restless spirit and penetrating gaze, crossed paths with a disheveled-looking man, dressed in clothes that seemed to have been abandoned by time. Something about that figure made her hesitate. Eleonora felt a strange familiarity as she passed Arthur, disguised as a beggar. There was something in the way he carried himself, in the firmness hidden in his eyes behind the masks of poverty. She couldn't understand why her heart beat faster, as if she recognized an old friend or a lover lost in wartime. Each step she took, away from him, was as if it brought her closer to an abyss of hidden memories. She shook her head, trying to push away that unsettling feeling, blaming tiredness and routine for her wander. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, Jonas walked with his usual clumsy haste. His thoughts were a storm of commitments and longings, but upon seeing the beggar, something within him stopped him. There was an inexplicable force that called to him, an urgency to offer a gesture of humanity. Jonas didn't know that the man was Arthur, the professor in disguise, but he felt a spiritual connection, a need to share the little he had. He approached hesitantly, offering a sincere smile and a few coins, a gesture that, for him, represented a breath of hope in a world that seemed stubbornly cold. Laura, observing the scene from afar, was touched by the simplicity of the act. She had always believed in the inherent goodness of people, even when reality insisted on contradicting. To see Jonas, a man who often seemed lost in his own problems, stop to help someone who seemed to have even less, was for her like witnessing a silent miracle. It was proof that, beneath the surface hardened by life, the human heart still beat with compassion and generosity. And so, in this intertwining of destinies and gestures, Arthur, even under the guise of a beggar, found hope and humanity. He realized that, even in their disguises, the true nature of people was revealed. While Eleonora struggled against unknown memories, Jonas and Laura reaffirmed their faith in the goodness hidden on every corner. The city, in its autumnal quiet, held secrets that, little by little, began to intertwine, weaving a network of connections that would defy the darkness of Lorena's basement. And so, the story continued to unfold, like leaves carried by the wind, moving towards the unknown. Lorena felt the noose tightening. Each day, the shadows around her seemed to lengthen, threatening to engulf her. She, who had always prided herself on her ability to manipulate the game to her advantage, was beginning to realize that the pieces were no longer entirely under her control. The constant presence of Jonas and Laura, always so close, yet so distant, unsettled her. There was something in their eyes, a silent determination that deeply troubled her. Determined not to be discouraged, Lorena decided it was time to intensify her measures. She called Leandro, her most trusted accomplice, a man of few words but precise actions. Their eyes met in a tacit understanding, and Lorena instructed him to watch every suspicious step that approached her house. Leandro, familiar with the streets and the little secrets they held, accepted the task with the serenity of someone who had already accomplished far more dangerous missions. While Leandro was busy with his surveillance, Lorena plotted a darker plan. She had decided that an accident would be the perfect way to ward off any unwanted curiosity from her mansion. The idea was simple, almost elegant in its cruelty. An out-of-control car, a brake that inexplicably failed, a piece of sidewalk that became the scene of tragedy. She knew who to turn to execute such a plan, someone who wouldn't ask questions and wouldn't leave a trace. With her mind immersed in strategies and precautions, Lorena dedicated herself to preparing her home so that nothing would arouse suspicion. Before the watchful eyes of her aunt, she played the perfect role of a dedicated and attentive woman, an irreproachable host. But behind that impeccable facade, there was a mind always alert, calculating every move. Every morning, she walked through the hallways, adjusting whatever was necessary, ensuring that every corner of the house reflected the normality she desperately wanted to project. Despite her attempts to remain calm, Lorena couldn't shake the growing sense of unease in her chest. There was something unsettling about the way the yellow leaves fell from the trees, as if nature were somehow conspiring against her. Her gaze, though cautious and manipulative, couldn't help but flicker with worry whenever her aunt mentioned Jonas or Laura in casual conversation. Amidst all of this, Lorena couldn't stop reflecting on her own history, on the decisions that had led her to this point. The secret she kept in the basement wasn't just a shadow of her past. It was a promise of power, a reminder that control was, or should be, in her hands. However, The weight of this knowledge was a burden that began to press down on her shoulders, threatening to bring down the house of cards she had built. Despite her meticulously crafted strategies and plans, Lorena knew she was walking on thin ice. In every shadow of twilight, she saw potential betrayal. In every night sound, a harbinger of doom. She was determined to fight to the end, to not let her world crumble. But deep inside, a voice whispered an uncomfortable truth. However much she tried to control fate, fate had its own plans, and they were only beginning to unfold. The atmosphere in Lorena's house was thick with an almost palpable tension, as if the air were saturated with electricity about to erupt in a violent lightning bolt. Each room, each hallway, seemed to whisper hidden secrets and promises of imminent upheavals. Lorena's preparations were in full swing, meticulous and silent, like a conductor leading a somber symphony that only she could hear. Her steps were calculated, her expression impenetrable, and her eyes, ever watchful, scrutinized every detail of her surroundings. Within this storm about to form, Hugo, Arthur's loyal squire, was immersed in his own tasks, oblivious to the vortex of intentions that were lining up around him. He and Professor Arthur, on their mission of surveillance and espionage, had their routines meticulously planned. When the sun set, both found themselves on the periphery of their daily activities, carefully observing, gathering fragments of information that could unravel the puzzle that was Lorena. Arthur, disguised as a beggar, moved through the streets and alleys with the skill of a consummate actor. Beneath his sun-weathered skin and clothes that exuded the fragrance of time, his eyes gleamed with the sharp intelligence of a man who had dedicated his life to the pursuit of knowledge. He knew he was approaching something great, a truth hidden in the shadows Lorena cast. However, the truth, as he well knew, was a capricious mistress, rarely revealing herself without sacrifice. Back home, Lorena remained an enigmatic figure. Even under the weight of uncertainty, she exuded an almost supernatural calm. Her mind was a labyrinth of strategy, where each thread of thought was a piece of the puzzle she herself had created. There was a clear purpose in every gesture, a fierce determination in every decision. She knew that the slightest slip could cause irreparable harm, but she was willing to face any storm that fate threw her way. As the clock ticked away with its relentless cadence, Lorena waited patiently, like a predator poised to pounce. She knew her best weapon was time, and she was prepared to use it to her advantage. Deep within her, she carried a dark secret, guarded with the same zeal a dragon would guard its treasure. And although she knew Arthur and Hugo were on her trail, her confidence in her own plan kept her steadfast, unwavering in the face of the approaching storm. Thus, the stage was set. On one side, Lorena, with her intricate schemes and unwavering determination. On the other, Arthur and Hugo, persistent in their search for answers. And between them, a secret buried deep in the basement, awaiting the right moment to emerge and change the course of their lives forever. The tension was a rope stretched to its limit, ready to snap at any instant. And when that happened, nothing would ever be the same. The rain fell incessantly, as if the sky itself wept for the fate of those involved in the plot unfolding beneath its gray veil. Arthur, his watchful gaze hidden beneath the brim of his worn hat, could still feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins. He knew the truth was close to being unearthed, but the price to pay might be too high. Lorena was in her element, moving with the calculated elegance of a predator who believes she has cornered her prey. Her footsteps echoed on the cold basement floor, where shadows danced to the rhythm of the flickering flames of strategically placed candles. The atmosphere was heavy, laden with expectation and unspoken secrets. While Arthur struggled to avoid drawing attention, the dampness of the room began to seep into his clothes, making the situation even more uncomfortable. His disguise as a beggar, though convincing, was becoming a burden now that he was on the verge of being discovered. He knew he couldn't falter, not when he was so close to uncovering the truth that Lorena had kept locked away. But, as fate loves to play with human hopes, a moment of carelessness was enough to turn the tables. Trying to sneak into a safer position, Arthur bumped into an old wooden shelf, causing a series of glass bottles to shatter on the floor. The tea sound was deafening in the quiet of the basement, and Lorena's eyes, previously occupied with her own thoughts, were now fixed on him. For a moment that seemed eternal. Time stood still. Arthur, feeling the heat of Lorena's gaze burning in his direction, knew his disguise was compromised. The mask fell, revealing the man behind that disheveled facade. Lorena, for her part, couldn't help but flash a cynical smile, as if she had expected something like this to happen. However, Arthur was not willing to give up without a fight. With a swift movement, he activated a small device he carried in his coat pocket. The device, a discreet contraption, began to record every word, every confession that Lorena might let slip in her state of surprise and anger. It was his only chance to turn the tables in his favor. While Lorena was still processing the turn of events, the basement door suddenly opened, revealing the silhouette of Jonas, who had been alerted by Hugo. With determination in his eyes and renewed hope in his heart, he descended the stairs quickly, knowing that Arthur needed him now more than ever. The ensuing confrontation was intense and full of emotional outbursts. Lorena, cornered, tried to maintain control of the situation, but the noose was closing in. Arthur, with Jonas by his side, felt strengthened and finally began to reveal the truths that had been hidden in the shadows of the basement. Eleonora, with her serene presence and scrutinizing gaze, listened attentively to every word, understanding that the fate of everyone there was about to change forever. The basement, silent witness to so many secrets and conspiracies, became the stage for a truth so powerful that no disguise could contain it. At that moment, with the storm raging outside, the destinies of Lorena, Arthur, Jonas, and Eleonora became irreversibly intertwined, sealed by a secret that had finally been brought to light. In that moment of revelation, when the masks fell and the secrets, like unleashed ghosts, danced in the heavy air of the basement, Lorena felt the crushing weight of the truth fall upon her shoulders. The walls, complicit in her schemes, now seemed to suffocate her with their oppressive silence. Eleonora, with eyes burning with fury, stared at her like an empress disappointed by the betrayal of a beloved subject. Disillusionment was a beast that roared within each member of the family, its sound echoing in the darkest corners of their hearts. Lorena, who had always known how to manipulate the puppets around her with invisible strings of lies, was now beset by Eleonora's wrath. Her voice, once a soft melody of persuasion, was now just a hesitant whisper. The family, once a shield she used wisely, had become an insurmountable fortress, its walls erected by pain and betrayal. She searched the eyes of those around her for some remnant of understanding, but found only broken mirrors reflecting the chaos she had caused. Amidst this turmoil, Professor Arthur stood out as a beacon of hope and righteousness. He, who had infiltrated the shadows of the mansion under the cloak of humility and vigilance, was now acclaimed for his courage and sagacity. His upright figure and calm gaze brought a sense of security to the residents, who began to see him not only as a man of knowledge, but as a guardian of truth. Murmurs of gratitude and admiration ran through the corridors, and his name was repeated with reverence, while the winds of change swept away the last vestiges of uncertainty. Jonas and Eleonora, once separated by an abyss of misunderstanding and unspoken grievances, found a way back to each other amidst the chaos. The recent struggle, with its pain and revelations, had been a kind of purification. The storm had not only stripped them bare, but also strengthened their bonds, now intertwined with threads of truth and mutual recognition. The basement, which had been the scene of so much distrust, had become the sanctuary, where silent vows of loyalty and love were renewed. As the storm outside began to subside, a new dynamic emerged within the mansion. Echoes of the past still resonated, but now they were a background melody to the chords of a future that promised to be more truthful and, perhaps, gentler. At that moment, under a sky still heavy with clouds, each one present felt that, although the secrets had been revealed, there was still much to build. And so, with renewed hope and a deeper understanding, they prepared their hearts for the new challenges that destiny would inevitably bring them. At the end of that turbulent journey, where truths were revealed and lies stripped away, the atmosphere was imbued with a serenity that only justice can bring. The soft light of dawn filtered through the trees, as if nature itself were eager to bathe everyone in a new beginning. The professor, standing, felt the weight of the disguise, and the secret finally lift from his shoulders. He had become, out of necessity, a silent observer of the shadows, but now he was once again immersed in the light, and with him, a community that seemed to be reborn from the ashes of deceit. This story, full of twists and turns and revelations, left a clear and touching lesson. Good always finds a way to manifest itself, even when all odds seem insurmountable. Like a seed sprouting through the most resistant soil, truth and justice rose triumphantly above the veil of darkness. There was a renewed hope in the air, a reinvigorated belief that, even in the face of the deepest despair, goodness can shine and illuminate the darkest paths. Reflecting on the unfolding events, it's impossible not to ponder the importance of seeing beyond the masks people wear. The professor, in his quest, discovered that appearances can be deceiving, and that often it is in the heart, not the face, that someone's true character resides. He learned that the true face of people is only revealed when one looks with the eyes of the igai soul, beyond the veils of illusion. Just as he needed to disguise himself to discover the truth, how many times do we deceive ourselves, or are we deceived by what appears to be? The viewer is therefore invited to deep introspection. Whom do you truly trust? What masks do you, or those around you, wear every day? And how could you see beyond appearances, find the heart that beats beneath the surface? This is not just a story of mystery unraveling, but an invitation to a more attentive, deeper look at those who surround us and, perhaps, at ourselves. In that scenario where life seemed to be starting anew, the professor realized that more than ever, it was essential to listen not only with his ears, but with his whole being. And with this new understanding, he was ready to face the challenges that the future would inevitably bring. Like him, we are invited to open our eyes and hearts, so that we too can discover the hidden truths that may await us, and thus walk with confidence and clarity towards the unknown